After the Civil War, African Americans were disenfranchised throughout the Southern states, even after passing the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, in which all men, regardless of race or color, were given the right to vote. States still continued to use different methods to prevent people of color from voting, including literacy tests, poll taxes, threats, and even violence. Also, until 1965, federal laws did nothing to challenge the authority of states and localities to establish and administer their own voting requirements. Racial discrimination continuously prevented African Americans from being hired for jobs along with getting economic equality. The March on Washington group met annually to discuss demands in order to gain equality.
The Edmund Pettus Bridge was a symbol for the progressional changes. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's efforts to receiving equal voting rights did not succeed, so Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference decided to help make the unjust voting laws of Selma a national concern. About 600 marchers gathered in Selma March 7th. Civil rights leader John Lewis and other activists led the march crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge across the Alabama River in the direction of Montgomery. They were stopped by Alabama state troopers and police ordering the protesters to depart and leave. However, they rejected and stood their ground. This resulted in violence between two parties and conclusively hospitalizing nearly 50 people. This day came to be known as Bloody Sunday. Not giving up, King asked civil rights supporters to join the second march. Congress wanted King to postpone the march until they could get federal protection. King refused and led the march on the 9th anyways. He ended up making the decision to turn around at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, feeling that something was not right. King's decision increased tension among the rest of the activists who were eager to get to their rights. On March 21st, the last march took place, and it was successful due to federal protection. The Voting Rights Act was passed on August 6, 1965. This was a major step forward within the civil rights movement. Important people and organizations during this event include Amelia Boynton Robinson, who organized the first march, John Lewis, who led the first march, Martin Luther King Jr., who was the leader for the last two marches, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who viewed King as an essential partner in getting the Voting Rights Act enacted.
Even after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Lincoln to free the slaves, African Americans continued to suffer in a world of segregation under the Jim Crow laws. Throughout the fight for civil rights activists such as Martin Luther King Jr. led marches to fight for their rights, or Rosa Parks found other ways of fighting for civil rights, such as the bus boycott. The idea was to make the government conform to their wants and needs by non-violently protesting and disobeying their society's rules. Many risked their lives, and throughout marches such as the March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, many people were lost because of violent enforcement personnel. A lot of hardship was faced throughout the years of fighting for civil rights. However, leeway such as the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act encouraged people to keep marching and fighting for what they believed in.
Following the attempted march from Selma to Montgomery over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, there were more attempts to bring change to advance the civil rights movement. On March 9, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led another march to the bridge. Due to this, many of the civil rights leaders searched for court protection for another march. This would be marked as the third march and would be much larger than the previous attempts. Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. of the Federal District approved the beliefs of the demonstrators by allowing the right of mobility and the right to march. This planned demonstration occurred on March 21st, where 3,200 marchers walked 12 miles a day, sleeping in the fields on their journey to Montgomery. The original group multiplied by more than 5 times and ended up to be around 25,000 people by the time they reached the Capitol on March 25th. After these 3 marches, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. From 1980 to 2009, the prison populations rose from 320,000 prisoners to 1.62 million prisoners. One of the reasons the population continues to increase is that people are being sentenced for more and more time. Over the past 30 to 40 years, tougher sentencing laws have come into play to cause this increase. Another is the increase in drug selling and usage, and therefore the increase in drug-related arrests. Even though approximately 1/3 of prison populations are from drug charges, about 2/3 are from property or violence crimes. If you released every person in prison on a drug charge today, our state prison population would drop from 1.5 million to only 1.2 million. Police also have gotten more efficient due to the technologies and approaches. They're arresting more people, which means we're admitting more people to prison. We're admitting more arrested people because district attorneys are more likely to file a felony charge, going from about 1 in 3 cases to 2 in 3 cases.
Bernie Sanders addressed our country's problem, the jail populations, and how we have more people in jail than any other country. He believes that youth unemployment is a huge reason as to why so many people are in jail. Therefore, his solution is to make sure kids go to school and get the education they need. Sanders also wants all kids to have jobs, so that they won't have the free time to hang out on street corners and make decisions that could potentially get them in trouble. When crime was unusually high, policymakers and law enforcement incarcerated people because they believed it was the best crime-fighting strategy. However, even as the crime rates were decreasing, they continued to incarcerate people. For example, as youth crime plummeted, the jail population increased by more than 400%. Better economies are believed to reduce crime. So Bernie Sanders' motive is that by giving jobs to kids and teaching them what it is like to have to manage time and money will overall create a better economy and less crime.
In Ohio, there is an argument on the mass incarceration crisis and what to do in order to decrease the amount of people behind bars. The American Civil Liberties Union and the Ohio Justice and Policy Center reportedly calling for changes such as limiting automatic sentences, lowering fines, and prioritizing rehabilitation. When Ohio's prisons were built, they were meant to hold 38,000 inmates, but currently hold about 50,000. The report notes that African Americans account for nearly half of the state's prison population, but are less than 13% of the state population. In the report, they also include many recommendations, including expanding the ability for prisoners to reduce their sentences throughout earned credit.
The United States is the world's leader in incarceration with 2.2 million people currently in the nation's prisons or jails, a 500% increase over the past 30 years. This is the result of prison overcrowding and state governments being overwhelmed by what to do with the prisoners. Even though incarcerations have increased, it is not a very effective way of achieving public safety. Much of this is due to racial profiling. This relates to the Edmund Pettus Bridge because the demonstrators were fighting for their rights, in particular voting rights, such as not being put into jail for unjust reasons. Today, minorities are still fighting that battle and are being stereotyped. Many police officers today use racial profiling, which result in increased prison populations.